Released July 3rd, 2019, Midsommar is Ari Aster's 10th film. Generally, the movie can be summarized as a psychological American indie horror film. The film follows a group of friends who visit a rural Swedish village to partake in a midsummer festival, only to discover sinister rituals and dark secrets are lurking beneath the seemingly idyllic surface. Specifically, the film travels through the relationship of Florence Pugh's Danny and Jack Rayner's Christian as the festivities progress, tensions rise, relationships unravel, and the visitors find themselves trapped in a nightmarish descent into madness, pagan horror, and complicity. In reference to the Midsommar discussion page reading on the film 2270 D2L, Aster is quoted in saying, "Genre filmmaking provides you with a sturdy framework that you can lay messier emotions onto and tell a very personal story, but it provides you with a strict path that you have to adhere to and forces you to find the catharsis in that story." Midsommar is a horror through and through. However, Aster navigates this genre carefully. Traditionally, horror has been a genre that is free and wild, but it is often solely valued on the film's ability to create fear or scare the audience. This can create the cinematic trap of horror, where films are designed to purely scare with a weaker plot and often stereotypical gender roles, for the ultimate focus of drawing audience purely in the fear depicted. So one may ask, how is Aster's Midsommar any different? The answer I would provide is simple: American indie cinema. Indie cinema forces a subversion in the sense that American indie cinema and its content requires a meaning. Even in American indie films with little to no plot, little to no dialogue, or little to no visuals, the lack of has a meaning. The facet that is being left out raise a reluctant message to the story itself. American indie cinema asks the directors to provide a message beyond the art, beyond commercial success. American indie films prioritize an artistic message, which is often critiquing a philosophical point, group, government, societal choice, gender norm, or whatever other meaning there is for one to have a take on. In this context, Aster provides a few jump scares, a convention of horror that is plagued in Hollywood horror. More so, the horror of Midsommar is the story itself, a complete acceptance of the madness the cult offers, whereby the viewer can observe the danger and threat of the cult increasing scene to scene, just as some of the characters do. However, the story only continues for both the audience and the characters. Essentially, the horror of the movie is watching a group of people become manipulated and murdered through the complete acceptance of wild ideology. Aster threatens jump scares in the angles and positioning of shots, but this is only done to distract the audience and build more suspense. The true fear is what you are worrying is next to come. Aster understands the receptive indie audience and speaks to them. To paraphrase the film's IMDb, Midsommar had a $9 million USD budget. However, in total, the film had a worldwide gross of $48 million. Produced by indie house A24, Midsommar was either a light box office disaster or a massive success. Obviously, in its $39 million net gain, the latter occurred. However, without a studio like A24, this film wouldn't be able to happen. Horror films are based in the audience's ability to react to them. The framing, pacing, lighting, angles, and much more is what truly makes the audience afraid. However, A24 allowed Aster to do an indie American classic, to flip subversions and present something that absolutely breaks the audience's preconceptions, all in the name of enhancing the meaning behind his film. A24 invested in this film not because of the horror genre or because of its profitability, but because of the story that Ari was trying to tell, and the actual meaning behind the film, and how you choose to interpret it versus what Ari actually means in the film. And following the money, we can understand that A24 is a successful American indie production house. They're able to save money through indie institutions like film critics and film festivals. These festivals and critics promote the films to a larger audience who are then able to go see it and are informed, thus saving money that A24 would previously have to spend on advertising campaigns and commercial success. Furthermore, this money allows them to spend more money on future products. This is essential in American indie filmmaking, as money is tight. People would rather pay millions of dollars into massive productions that will be box office hits versus indie films that often hold artistic messages that are extremely individual. However, A24, through American indie institutions like film festivals, are able to carefully navigate this commercialized lane. This course has consistently shown that American indie cinema is created for an audience that is looking to understand the film beyond the surface level of basic plot and enjoyability. The American indie audience finds their enjoyability in understanding the film in its totality. They watch every minute detail. Here, an individual who is purely going to see a horror movie would be somewhat lost but can understand the creepiness in what seems to be a Renaissance or medieval-esque mural. However, there is much more at play. The American indie audience sees far more. They understand that every decision made by the director is planned and plotted on a board months to years in advance. Hours were spent editing the slide of the mural and the choice of the mural itself. Furthermore, time equals money and meaning. Knowing that a director wouldn't portray a screen-filling mural just for the genius loci of the film, the indie American audience looks deeper. They would notice that consistently throughout Danny's apartment, there are similarly thematic murals. Seeing such a connection between Danny and the murals, the American indie audience would be given a key by Astor. As this first opening mural directly depicts the entire film, akin to a poetic epigraph, this image is Astor offering a singular artistic image on how the film will travel. While for American indie audiences, this connection is easier to establish through their receptive nature, Astor is actively dancing with the concept of a receptive audience and enabling those outside of the American indie realm to look beyond the plot. Essentially, Astor spoils the entire film in the vein of asking you to look deeper, the exact same way in poetic epigraphs, where poets would present the themes of their work in order for new readers to actually understand what was going on and to actually understand other works that were taking place that shared the exact same context. Here, the artist is giving you a passage into the work. It's an entry point that allows you to put things aside and look at things through the lens they want you to. Furthermore, Astor is aware of the audience he is reaching. He understands who consumes indie films and is directing a message towards them. In context, the religious relatability I brought up in class, this film features many of the facets in the cyclical nature of scapegoating or the mimetic triad, whereby conflict leads to scapegoating, which leads to peace and content, which leads into conflict. As now individuals base their livelihoods in happiness, and others who are seemingly happier or more successful become desired in their agency, land, materials, or wealth. Within this philosophical concept, the idea of a foundational murder is required in order to end the conflict and absolve the sins of those in conflict. In relation to the film, one could draw a comparison between Christian and Christianity. Beyond just namesake, Christianity features the most famous foundational murder, that of Christ. After the death of Christian, Danny finds herself at a point where she is fully accepted within the group and is fully encompassed. She believes she has agreed to scapegoat. In Christian becoming the scapegoat, he is singled out as the point of problem. Down the road, there will be conflict, but in the current moment, there is a temporary psychological relief that occurs. In context to American indie cinema, Ari Aster is creating a theme that is only truly understandable when one detaches the physical plot. Meaning, one is only truly able to understand this theme when they suspend the physical or physics of the story, the traveling of Sweden, and the logic of the group. Once they look at the group contextually, from a total perspective, they are able to understand the take that Aster is giving. More importantly, Aster, as mentioned by Mario Trono in class, is Jewish. This is a Jewish director directly showing the Jewish perspective on the scapegoating of people who are Jewish, and how the stereotypes develop, how the stereotypes become cemented, and how people find it okay to single them out as a point of problem. More so, he is showing the cognitive dissonance that takes place when someone agrees to marginalize a group, something that his family and his community knows all too well. The most overt theme in the film Midsommar is that of Nazism and anti-Semitism. While much of this theme hinges on a very overt visual clue, There was also the need for real-world context in order to understand the message that Astor is portraying. Ultimately, German society became complicit with the horrendous message and horrible concept of scapegoating a multifaceted group of humans in the Jewish people. However, what happens in Midsommar is what happened. Many people can look back on history and ask, how could the German people be so complicit in this message? They did horrible things. It was understood the Jewish people were going to be taken into imprisonment. However, Astor provides and shows them why. You can see in the film, step by step, individuals agree and understand that people are going to die and they are complicit in it. Not because they're horrible people, but because there has been a scapegoat created. You disconnect the person from the body. Previously, I had mentioned and said that the concept of Nazism and the critique of anti-Semitism as being the overt theme in the film. One might dispute this and argue the theme is more philosophical. However, we can see in the image here of the book that this theme is all too real and all too present. In regards to the visuals of the film, it is important to note that due to the independent nature of American indie cinema, directors and cinematographers have an increased inherent value in wanting to provide stunning artistic work. There is a focus on providing work that differs from what the mainstream Hollywood movies are putting out. In part of this, directors and cinematographers often use color palettes in different sections of their films to highly explain what is going on and what is changing in the character in comparison to color. If we look at earlier in the film, we can see that there are many dark blues, light grays, and vivid blacks, which reflect the time in Danny's life following the loss of her family. However, if we look towards the transition to Sweden, we can see some of the highlighted natural colors shining through. Deep greens, strong yellows, and a striking blue consistent sky that is featured in many scenes. Furthermore, if we compare the shot selection from earlier in the film to the later portion when they travel to Sweden, we can see that a lot of the shots early in the film are confined to homes. We don't see the homes in their full view. We see confined shots of hallways, rooms, close-ups of clocks. However, once we travel to Sweden, the audience is subjected to wide landscape shots and shots of buildings that usually encompass the entire building, going from wall to wall or the entire room. This is done to show the openness to the culture that is being presented to Danny. So at the end of the day, one has to ask why. Why explore the thematic understanding of Midsommar? Some would argue that it takes away from the project's goal of understanding Midsommar as a piece of indie filmmaking. However, I would offer this retort. Step by step, this course has taught me that American indie cinema is focused on proving a message and having a point. The whole idea of having a theme to explore, or a topic or an ideology to develop, is at the essence of what American indie cinema is. The earliest American indie films have critiques in them. They have an understanding that they are going against the grain of what is supposed to happen. Thus, indie in the name. Themes talking about the scapegoating of Jewish people and the development of Nazi ideology is not a commercialized idea. It is an idea that only could exist in indie. And in explaining it and developing this idea, it only further proves how much of an indie film this is. Specifically, how much of an American indie film this is in being able to relay a point of a marginalized group through the process of a horror film.